Ladies and gentlemen, Damen und Herren, ein herzlich willkommen, a very warm welcome. And for all of our Italian-speaking guests, buongiorno e benvenuti to the annual SIT Insights in Technology Conference 2020. From wherever you are joining us in the world, we hope this finds you and yours safe and healthy. My name is Andrea Montero, and it is my pleasure to be your host for today's virtual event. The second edition of the Science and Technology Conference is the brainchild of the Schaffhausen Institute of Technology, an organization that uses an interdisciplinary approach to science and education. With the help of an outstanding lineup of world-renowned speakers, we will focus on transformative sciences, so computer science, physics, and business science, and explore how these can be used to shape a better and more sustainable world. We are pleased to know that so many of you share our enthusiasm. I mean, as of this morning, we have almost 3,000 registered attendees from across Europe, the US, Asia, and the Middle East. So again, a very warm welcome to all of you. Now, before we start, just a couple of housekeeping notes. The conference will be recorded, and all registered attendees will get a link to the recording after the live conference is over. Please note that the only exception is in session number 2, and this is a presentation by Amazon's senior principal economist, Domenico Giannone. This is restricted and will not be recorded. So make sure that you tune in and catch it live, because again, there will not be an opportunity to rewatch that afterwards. And lastly, we know that we cannot offer you the same level of interaction and networking you would get at one of our live events. However, all is not lost. Don't hesitate to send in your questions and comments. SIT experts will be standing by to answer your questions, or if relevant, we can also include them in the live Q&A session that will happen at the end of each session. Of course, time permitting, we will try to answer all of your questions live. However, you know how it works. We don't get to it. We do promise to follow up with you directly afterwards. Now, today's events would not be possible without the support of SIT's partners, which you see on the screen now. So a big thank you to proud partners, Acronis and Georg Fischer, the support of Canton Schaffhausen and MNRP, New Regional Politic, and the network partners, IBS and ITS. Now, I'm excited to see over 500 people are joining us live now for what we are sure will be a dynamic and insightful day. The program and speakers you'll be hearing from were carefully selected by the conference chair. He is Professor Andrea Ferrari, director of the Cambridge Graphene Center and a member of the Strategic Advisory Board at SIT, along with the other members of the program committee. And they are Professor David Rosenblum, he's Dean of Computer Science Department at George Mason University. Dr. Flavia Domarchio, she is Science and Technology Officer at SIT. Professor Fabio Pamoli, Professor of Economics and Management at the Politecnico di Milano. Professor Mette Atature, Professor of Quantum Physics at the University of Cambridge. And Dalit Steiger, co-founder of Swiss Cognitive. Now, the program itself is divided into 4 unique sessions that cut across several disciplines with a focus on quantum technologies, advanced materials, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and business scientists. So in the first session, Science X.0, chaired by Professor Andrea Ferrari, you'll hear the keynote address of top world-renowned scientists. So Nobel laureate Konstantin Novoselov, researcher at the forefront of quantum information technology, Christopher Monroe, and technology entrepreneur, Serguei Beloussov. Exciting, right? Well, do make sure you stay to the end of the session for that Q&A so that you can also get in your questions. Now, right after the first session, we will run 2 stages covering different science and science transformation topics, respectively. So the power of quantum, as you can see, is one. It will highlight scientific talks in the areas of quantum physics, business science, and computer science. And then you also have science transformation, so new pathway for a sustainable society, that will focus on promoting and disseminating the activities of the most promising startups in the field of quantum technologies, artificial intelligence, advanced materials, and fintech. Again, both sessions offer you a possibility to address questions to the speakers, so you know what to do. The fourth and final session, called The Beauty of Science, is designed in a way to make complex science and technology accessible for a broader audience. To help us with this, we are honored to host Professor Nicolas Gissin, who is often referred to as the father of quantum communication, and who will share with us the story of quantum chance. We also have Dr. Serguei Beloussov, who will return to provide us insights into the future of computing. And then, as before, the session will also end with a Q&A, so we encourage you once more to jump in and send in those questions so we can include them in the live portion. And with that, I am very delighted to introduce today's conference chair, Andrea Ferrari. He is Professor of Nanotechnology at the University of Cambridge, Fellow of Pembroke College, and as previously mentioned, a member of SIT's Strategic Advisory Board. Professor, over to you.
Thank you, Anna Maria. It's a great pleasure to be here today and to introduce this excellent conference based on the main themes of SIT. We're going to have a great lineup of speakers, and I would like to remind you of the lineup that we have for this first session. We have Serguei Beloussov, who is the founder of Acronis, but most importantly, the founder of SIT. Konstantin Novoselov, who is the chair of the advisory board of the SIT, and also got the Nobel Prize for the pioneering work on graphene in 2010. And Chris Monroe from the University of Maryland and Duke University, and also from IonQ, who is going to go deeper in the computational sciences. With this, I will start a presentation where I will introduce for you the main themes that are underpinning the vision of the strategy for SIT. Okay, so this is what SIT is setting out to do and what the advisory board has discussed in the past few months. So we want to really tackle issues that can be relevant for society, especially for a sustainable society. So we want to do sustainable, transformative science to tackle the main sustainable development goals. The main activities of SIT are around the themes of quantum technology and advanced materials. You will see it many times today. It's called QTAM. And then we have computer science, we call it CS. And then quantitative or quantum business science, and we call it QBUS. And really, SIT wants to do discovery-based research, developing radically new technology for the long-term benefit of society. So our mission is again to research and investigate problems at the intersection of these three areas: computer science, quantum technology, advanced materials, and quantum business science. So we want to put forward a new way of doing research that produce results that are important for society. The strategic research domains are complemented, going from hardware to software to the creation of companies and startups. And we will so engage with academic, industrial, and public stakeholders, and you will see also today over the talks. And of course, we believe in the strong contemporary foundation of the humble ideal of academic education, where academic freedom is also preserved. So what are the main themes? In computer science and software engineering, the areas that have been focused on are artificial intelligence and machine learning, cybersecurity and information integrity, and software engineering. In quantum technology and advanced materials, we are going to look as well as quantum engineering. And in quantum business science, computational modeling, decisions and behavior, networks and society are really at the foundation of what is going to be done. All of these together will create a variety of generative domains in different areas, from digital health to market intelligence, to wearable and flexible electronics, to the future of 5G and 6G, and to the integration of AI and machine learning with bio and pharma. And all of this will be done in an approach that is interdisciplinary and leads from fundamental to applied science. I don't have clearly the time to cover all the topics, so my cut is the following. We all want to be connected. We are all connected today listening to this talk, And this has been made even more important by the current COVID situation. This is the Ericsson Mobility Report published a few months ago, and it's not surprising to see that there was a massive increase in Wi-Fi use, 20 to 100% increase in traffic, and in fact, by 2025, in over 50% or almost 50% of the users will be connected by 5G. But what is next? After 5G is a real challenge, is the 6th generation of communication that will create a new spectrum of technologies that are interconnected, where low latency, Wi-Fi connection, artificial intelligence, energy efficiency are important. We need to remind ourselves that 1 hour of Zoom creates 300 grams of CO2. So most people don't realize that at the moment, it is not the airline industry, the major contributor to global warming, but is the usage and exchange of data. When you send an email with a big attachment, you are creating 50 grams of CO2. So we need to find technologies that cut down significantly the use of energy and the impact less the environment where we are. So this cross-disciplinary team will bring together the cognitive evolution, hypersensing, high connectivity, high performance processing to 5G, 6G, and future networks. So they will create a smart environment for data acquisition, the Internet of Everything with sensors everywhere and connected together. And of course, all of these with edge computing, cloud computing, high performance processing to deal with the data. And fundamentally, all this data have to be exchanged securely. So there is a need for secure communication that can be done through quantum communications. And of course, all of this brings to the 5th industrial revolution, that where everything will be created in a new industry that is also called Industry X.0. And within this, there will be a digital transformation through breakthrough advances in society. We will create smart cities. We will promote advances in virtual and augmented reality. We'll revolutionize healthcare, and there will be connected autonomous vehicles and drones with safe traveling, improved data management, and so on. And there will be a need of massive scale connectivity. So in computer science, the main themes are software engineering, artificial intelligence, and cybersecurity. And in software engineering, not only we are going to look at classic architectures, but more importantly, at the path between the classic architecture to the new path that will be generated by quantum technology. So in quantum computing, there will be fundamental implications for all computer science, because we cannot simply use the software we're using now to run future computers that run on qubits. So the two areas will have to come together and have an intersection to create a new understanding and new technology that is not yet there. Another very important area, I think is clear for everybody, is the deep integration of artificial intelligence with biomedicine. So algorithms have reached the position that they can be trained at physician level. In fact, I heard that just yesterday in Europe, AI-based medical technology has been approved for use for the first time. And medicine will shift to be data-driven, especially for clinical diagnostic, precision treatment, and health monitoring. And then we will create trajectories that allow to understand the best combination of treatments for one disease without impacting other, have negative impact on the body. In the field of quantum technology and advanced materials, we bring together the areas of energy efficient ICT, wearable device, materials discovery, with sensing, metrology, computation, simulations, and networks. So quantum technology is founded on atoms and photons. It can be applied in a variety of new devices that are not just quantum computers, but integrated quantum networks and sensors. And when it comes to advanced materials, such as graphene and other layered materials, the aim is to have new integrated circuits where all these materials are integrated in different parts, from the source, the modulator, the transceiver, and the detector. And all these devices will be integrated in the body when it comes to wearable and biotechnology. I will really not go into the details of all the possibilities, but these pictures really clearly show you what can be done. Interestingly, there is a field of quantum biosensing where quantum technology can be used to improve the diagnostic tool for medicine, and also for other advanced technology based on new materials can be combined with AI to have advanced chemometric imaging, whereby instead of normal histopathologies, we take virtual slice of the body. So we want to create an innovation ecosystem that brings together advances in communication technologies, advances in sustainable energy, in health technology, and all driven and underpinned by new materials and devices that will allow us to create this system. And with this, I finished my introduction. I really gave a quick brush on all the themes that we hear today, and today there will be deep dives in all of the areas that I covered. So back to you, Anna Maria.
Thank you so much, Professor. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our first keynote speaker of the day. He is Dr. Serguei Beloussov, founder of Schaffhausen Institute of Technology, as well as CEO and founder of Acronis. He'll be providing insights about when the quantum rush will be and what can we expect will be the first industry-relevant outcomes. Over to you, Serguei.
Hi, everybody. Just a second, let me share my screen. This is a very long presentation, and I'm presenting it for the first time. I'll try to be very quick. So there is a lot of information. Hopefully I will have a chance to drill down on this information and to make it more detailed and more accurate. But here you go. The universe is a computer, and computers today are widely used to predict the universe. It's interesting, but with the COVID-19, one thing which happened is that in the biotech industry, it is clear that you can get vaccines certified within months, not years. And literally that is 10 times faster. And you cannot possibly do that unless you use computers to go through the whole process, including the modeling clinical trial, including the modeling of the production of the vaccine and making the factory, and how the vaccine will be distributed in the population. So digital computers, which we use today, are effectively equivalent to classical Turing machines. This is a result of 70, 80 years ago. Today, what we use for computation, including for biotech research, for physics research, is still digital computers, CPU, GPU, TPU. At the end of the day, is the same thing. Turing machine is one-dimensional. CPUs of the present mostly are two-dimensional. Some of them are three-dimensional. There is no more expansion. And with that, you have definitely a challenge. And the challenge is that the hottest problems of digital computers will not be solved in never. And because there are these fundamental reasons to limit performance and throughput of digital computers, to limit the minimal amount of power which is needed for digital computers, and to limit minimal size of a transistor. Now, computers are some devices which are well known to us. I want to point out that even those digital computers get into our lives in multiple stages. So first, there was scientific applications of computers. This is Atanasoff Berry computer in Iowa State, 1942. So scientific use was the first use, and there was specialized applications of digital computers. For example, this is guidance computers for missiles. Of course, there was famous decryption computers. And then of course, now computers became used by everybody, and all of us have multiple computers at the same time. If you look at the first quantum technology which came to humans, that is really laser. And so laser was invented around 1960, and the Nobel Prize for laser was awarded very quickly in 1964. But it took very long time before it became widespread. So first, it was definitely used in science for quite a while, for at least 10 years. Then there was in the 70s, early used in specialized applications, in barcode readers, for example, and in some optical cables. And then now it is just the laser is an over $10 billion industry, but that's just a component. Of course, it enables all of the information technology and for most of it, all of the digital computers as well. And so we believe that it is similar to the quantum computers, but we believe we are currently on the verge of something which I like to call a quantum rush. Recently, the venture firm which I'm involved with, Runa Capital, have done a review of a quantum technology space. It took about a year. We have spoken to about 115 contacts. We have looked at 15 companies. We talked to 44 universities. This is our own research, and we found that there is quite a bit of companies in the space, in the sensors and advanced materials, and a quantum software, and a quantum communications, quantum computing hardware, and optical and photonic computing. So all of this can be classified roughly as a quantum technology. And based on our information, there are a number of companies which are on the verge of breakthrough of becoming major companies funded with major amounts of money. And again, typically in a space where I started in a technology 10, 20 years ago, people talked about unicorns and talked about $100 million funding. Nowadays, we live in a different world. So we live in a world where unicorns have to have 10 corns. And so they really have to be valued at $10 billion and should to be valued with, to be funded with billions. I think we are not far from that being happening. That is my observation. And I'm not just talking about a single company, but about many companies. Again, what are the quantum technology applications today is quite well known. Really, there are three areas. Of course, some people like to reclassify it into several more areas, but in my opinion, it's quantum metrology, quantum sensors, it's quantum security and networking, and it is quantum computing, including quantum simulators, so digital computers and analog computers based on quantum technology. And so first, I wanted to talk about quantum sensors. So first of all, why do you need a quantum sensor? Apparently, as we know, the nature quantum sensors are the smallest possible size sensors. They will be the most power efficient sensors you can possibly make. They are the fastest and the most real-time sensors. They can guarantee the amount of time needed to respond. They could be the most cost-effective. They could be very, very small. Ultimately, we're talking about multiple atoms needed to make a reading. They are the most precise, and they could be the most stress-effective working in a very extreme environments. They could scale also to massive amounts of information, and perhaps in the future they can provide some magical qualities. You may ask, why do we need such sensors? And I'd like to give this simple example. This is my dog, Brunhilde. I just made this photo today. So I basically put this suit on a poor dog. She didn't like it quite too much because there is this Santa Claus sitting on her back. And this is a most advanced robot. And, you know, lucky for me, this company was bought for about $1 billion by Hyundai just recently, Boston Robotics. And for a little while, I evaluated buying the dog on the right instead of the dog on the left. And I've realized that this dog on the right, albeit most advanced, is actually very, very primitive. It is really, really very much inflexible. It doesn't see much, doesn't hear much, doesn't react to much, doesn't move very much, can move on certain surfaces. And so in order for us to make, for example, autonomous machines, whether it's a flying machines or walking machines or driving machines, we need thousands of times, if not millions of times, and thousands of times, if not millions of times, better sensors. So where we are today, again, in terms of scientific application, quantum sensors are used all the time. For example, atomic resolution magnetic imaging. There is a company in Basel called QNAMI, which is shipping technology, complete quantum microscope. In metrology, quantum sensors are used. There is many usage of quantum sensors as fundamental physics. There are also usage of quantum sensors in specialized applications. And so quantum gravitometers, definitely something very interesting. There is a number of companies in this area. optical atomic clocks, which could be much useful, especially very good GPS, especially inside enclosed spaces. And quantum magnetometers, a lot of promise for biomedical sensing, magnetic surveying, and so on. Now, widespread use, not yet, and I think one of the areas which is my personal favorite is to finally make a good MRI device. And before I switch to quantum communications, I want to answer a question. So if quantum sensors are so good, and if we can make them, why are they not widespread yet? In my opinion, this is the reason. The reason is that this is really not about the sensor itself. Sensor is a component. What you need is a quantum sensing platform, quantum hardware, quantum firmware, software to control the sensors and access the data, considering their precision, algorithm and software for processing the sensor data. And suddenly you get much more information. It's much more precise, it's much more rich, but you have to do something with it. Platform service software, which would allow you to customize it. There is no standards for quantum sensors yet. There are standards for normal sensors. And you also need to have applications which would actually demand quantum sensors. And so at the moment, this quantum sensing looks hard and risky for industrial applications. If you look at the, for example, newest designs of Airbus or Boeing planes, they use classical sensors, which are good enough. And those sensors are still improving. Now, this is really a more deep. Beside the sensing platform, you also need a processor which is able to process so much information, and you need an actuator which can act with a precision which is enabled by the sensor. And so this is a complex ecosystem which goes through a standard cycle for innovation, and we're at the beginning of the cycle. And so there are companies which are eventually in the quantum sensor space, like this startup from Lausanne, from EPFL, Mirax, which is proclaiming quantum sensors and will be delivering quantum sensors, but really now building a precision sensor platform. And again, if you look at the breakthroughs needed for some things, like mRNA vaccine technology was developed many years ago, but before COVID-19, it was basically not doing too much. With COVID-19 now, we have multiple vaccines developed on this technology, which are very, very promising, especially considering they're much easier to transport and deliver. And again, my personal favorite and something which can prevent early deaths and extend life is MRI imaging. The modern MRI imaging is really, really bad. What I've heard is that the usage for computer tomography and MRI have went up almost by the order of magnitude during COVID-19 because of the damage it gives to our internal organs and to the lungs. And so you can make it much easier. You can make it faster. It should take really, 5 minutes, not 1 hour. And you should not go into the tube, and it should be much more precise with the precision, not 0.1 or 0.2 millimeter, but much better precision and many other features. Okay, the next area is quantum, in quantum technology, security and networking. And again, here we have many scientific applications. So many scientific articles are written about different parts and different components of security and networking, single photon sources and detectors, entangled photon sources, quantum clocks, quantum teleportation articles, and so on. And a lot of the achievements of this area are useful for other areas. There are specialized applications. There are companies which are building production level quantum communication devices. This is telecom grade quantum communication device, which is built by D-Quantique company out of Geneva. I happen to have been a chairman of this company. I think one of our speakers is a current chairman, Nicolas Gizan. And you can also use it for tamper-proof GPS. One of the things you should realize, we are no longer able to orientate ourselves in a space. And if we are doing okay with it, at least if you look at our machines, they have no clue. And if somebody tampers with GPS, everybody will be completely lost, especially the planes. And through random number generators, which is the only guarantee of privacy. And then there is a widespread use, and there is widespread use which has not happened yet. And there is fundamental reasons for it. So again, the main reason for it is that quantum communication is not just about physical link and physical device and the link. It's also about network. It's also about transport. It's also about applications. And so even at the time when the quantum repeater technology will be developed, there will still be significant amount of effort and some time to wait before quantum internet, which was actually pictured on a previous slide, will become widely used, even though it's so much needed, because today practically it's impossible to have a private conversation unless you switch off your phone and you walk out in physical presence to somewhere in the forest with somebody. And so the main missing part is perceived to be quantum repeaters. I think it's a little bit more broad. So here we're talking about repeaters, which can extend the distance, but also switches, which can create a network, and also routers, which can route your packets in such network. And there are multiple things which are missing. I don't have that much time, but really there are several promising design, and I believe that good quantum repeaters for demonstration will be available in 5 to 7 years, and good quantum repeaters for production use will be available in 7 to 10 years. These are the designs which are most promising: rare earth ions and crystals, solid state spin memory, and ion traps. There is multiple challenges here. So again, I think in 5 years, it will be possible to have a 1,000 kilometer distance with quantum communication, which is a huge, of course, advance for this industry. Now, there is always, when I present something about quantum repeaters, it's always, what about satellites? What if you don't use fiber? There was a number of articles by the collaboration of researchers led by the Chinese. In my opinion, that is not super perspective direction, because they're expensive to launch. They are weather dependent. There is limited geographic coverage. You can't really build ground stations, and so on. However, I do think if the aliens are listening, perhaps that's the only way to communicate with SpaceX Mars settlement. And it might end up making sense, because actually being private in your communication with the outer development is super important. Okay, so now I'm switching to the most important part of my speech, which is about quantum computers. I really wanted to give this as an overview into the fact that the quantum technologies are not only present, but they are not so hard to understand, and they are not so simple to judge. And so quantum computer is probably the most mysterious thing. So it's really a very simple thing. It's a computer which uses quantum phenomena as superposition and entanglement to perform computations. And there are certain computational problems and physics problems which are much better on quantum computers. And already almost over a year ago, there was a semi-artificial problem which was solved on a quantum computer to achieve quantum supremacy. And of course, Canadian Prime Minister was the first Prime Minister which had to explain quantum computers. From what I've heard, it will become a new test for our prime ministers to be able to explain what is quantum computer. And I think from what I've heard, at least Angela Merkel is catching up. So what is the future? So again, here is the very simple phenomenon, scientific application. I think in a very near future, and already now, there are scientific applications, especially in simulation, which generate new science. A lot of the science is about confirmation of the theory which we have, the fundamental theory of quantum mechanics, which is a sort of most common theory to explain nature. But there are many articles in the past 10 years which already use simple quantum computers. There are many other things to demonstrate on quantum computers, especially quantum simulators. Then there are specialized applications coming. None of this is really yet super available. I think here we probably deserve to put a mark. For some reason, I forgot it's the first time, so I'll put it later. Specialized applications, there are really two, which we've heard. One of the optimization problems, such as network design problem, especially solving multiple independent set problem in graphs. And there are other optimization problems which can be solved. The good thing about a lot of optimization problems, once you find an optimization, you can check if it's actually valid. And then there's various code breaking problems which may be assisted by quantum computers, nothing yet available. And then one interesting thing about widespread quantum computers, such as universal quantum computers, which can be used for anything, or quantum machine learning, and so on and so forth, is that we really don't know yet the precise application of quantum computers. So this is basically a quick overview of what is a quantum computer. So the ultimate goal of this whole initiative, which is by now multi-$10 billion initiative, where there are hundreds of scientific groups participating on a good level. There's probably 100 groups which have some kind of something which can be claimed to be a quantum computer globally. So the ultimate goal is to build a universal quantum computer device which can execute any quantum algorithm. And the quantum computers can be digital, which actually enables them to emulate anything and do digital quantum algorithms, or analog, which can simulate certain quantum systems. For the universal digital quantum computer, we need a complete set of universal gates. And really every quantum computer can be combined from a set of 2-qubit and single qubit gates. And today the gates are not perfect, so you can actually use non-perfect gates nevertheless to do error correction, or you can use them to some extent in some algorithms. Typically, when people, and that's the main reason for my speech is really this one slide, is that typically when you talk about quantum computers, you will get an answer question, which I've heard from 2009. How many qubits do you have? Right, and that's a very, very simplistic question. In reality, quantum computer is all the things on the slide. So first of all, on the right, it is just the processor itself. So number of qubits, number of gates, types of gates you can emulate, gate fidelity, time of a single gate, coherence time, qubit read and write time, how long does it take to load and read the quantum register, how many qubits you can connect and in which way, how many modules you can connect, then cost per qubit, revenue per qubit you can extract on this quantum computer because of the usefulness of your algorithms. And in fact, I've just invented this yesterday after talking to one of the sort of successful companies in this space, the amount of capital which is raised per raised qubit. So there are several companies which are much better in amount of capital, and there are several companies which are much better in some other parameters. But even after you get this done, everything on the right, you should not forget that quantum computer is not just set of atoms. It's also firmware, quantum operating system, different OS services, different the compiler, control programs, a lot of non-quantum hardware around it. So really, the group in the future which builds a quantum computer may have 10 people working on the right side and may have 1,000 people working on the left side. So I go into very, very quick overview. So first of all, the very important parameter is not the number of gates, but the gate quality. And we're talking about physical gates here before error correction. And in my opinion, based on this research, which we have done preparing for the speech and over the course of our review of this industry, there are these 4 prevalent designs. Trapped ions, Chris Monroe is a representative of trapped ions. He is actually a founder of IonQ. Rydberg atoms, which is sort of similar but somewhat different. Superconducting qubits, which is the most popular design, as you can see, and photonics. So the gate fidelity is important to measure, both in terms of what is available now and what it's available, let's say, in 3 years, what is possible to achieve, and what is available for single qubit gates and for 2-qubit gates. And so the number of qubits without gate fidelity is really not so important. And one thing which is quite important is that if about 15 years ago, you would have a lot of people talking about the fact that these qubits are very noisy. By now, groups like IonQ achieve very high fidelity, at least for single qubit gates and even for double qubit gates. And it does sound like they can get 10 times better fidelity. In fact, almost every group which I have spoken to have identified that they have a certain fidelity right now, certain amount of times when the gate produces the result without error. And they will achieve 10 times better in the near future, and they can see potentially how they get to 100 times better fidelity. The next parameter is quantum error correction. Again, there is a prevailing misconception that in order to produce one logical qubit, one fault-tolerant qubit, which is needed for universal quantum computer, you somehow need millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of the physical qubits. That's not exactly correct. There is many very efficient codes. There is an Andrew Steen code, which is using 7 qubits to create fault-tolerant qubit. IonQ recently published an article where they were able to use 13 physical qubits for double error protection. And again, the error correction codes which are needed are really dependent on a physical design of the system. And so talking about fidelity without error correction and talking about fidelity and talking about qubits without fidelity makes no sense. Then, of course, it is important to understand how many qubits you can have and how connected they could be inside. And again, here is a quick comparison about between 4 different designs. So trapped ions by IonQ are in 1D array. There are articles about 2D arrays, and you know, the single model with trapped ions is perhaps today you know, tens of qubits, but it is clear that it is achievable to get to hundreds of qubits on a single array. Rydberg atoms are perhaps better, and they have a better potential in terms of number of qubits, but perhaps not equally well connected. That you can see the connectivity here between qubits. So number of qubits you can entangle is about the same. Superconductive qubits are having high potential. It is, you know, a little unclear field to me, because a lot of people are claiming huge numbers in say 3, 5, 10 years, but the quality of these numbers is not clear. And of course, the most recent result is a result published by Chinese on a photonic computer, which has another perspective. And so this is another comparison. A lot of these things are very important. So for example, for some algorithms, it is important that the qubits are very fast, because if you have even a quantum algorithm which requires quadrillion operations, if it takes you 1 microsecond, 1 millisecond to do a single operation, that is extremely slow. And so it will take a very long time. And forgive me if there are some errors here. I will fix it later. And so for some operations, for some algorithms which require quadrillion is really very small number in the world of computational complexity. Even though you would have a very high quality quantum computer with a lot of qubits, it may take you 1 billion years to accomplish that. And you know, there are many other things. And so again, every time we are looking at the companies in the space from the standpoint of investment, we're trying to compare them in a certain metric. Recently, IBM came up with a metric which is called quantum volume, which is number of gates in a time before decoherence multiplied by number of qubits, but it's also a very, very primitive number, right? So what can be done with noisy qubits in the near future? That is our own sort of estimate. So first, a lot of perspective on simulating many body systems. And there is already many simulations by some of the people who are speaking here. Notably, none of the simulations at the moment necessarily opened new areas in science or have an industrial application. So hopefully some industrial applications are coming. Then there is this famous application by Google, generation of certified random numbers. That is reasonably valuable, but you know, it definitely has some value. Then maximum independent set problem, which seemed to be promising to be solved on Rydberg atom quantum computers. There is a wonderful thing about maximum independent set problem in graphs, is that if it's solved, any NP complete problem can be brought to a maximum independent set problem. The only problem, of course, is that the number of nodes in this graph could be very, very large. So even though you can solve a maximum independent set problem on a graph which is impossible to be solved on a classical computer, that doesn't mean that you can solve a useful NP-complete problem in the near future. There are some other problems claimed by D-Wave. There is factorization. That is something which is not impossible to imagine. That you just need some a relatively small number of high-quality qubits to factorize 248 RSA bits. So it all depends on how quickly we produce 4,096 high-quality qubits, which can be programmed in any way, or there is this chemistry problems again, the important thing is that I think this is one of the challenges of quantum computers, is that there is not a clear, single, widespread problem which can be solved with quantum computer. And one reason for it is because these quantum computers are not produced yet. Now, nevertheless, there are very clear scientific problems. And so there's a huge scientific market for quantum computers as devices. And there is very clear specialized problems which can be solved with noisy quantum computers. So again, this is another way to present it. So today, there are scientific problems, then there are specialized problems. And again, we do not see yet a widespread problem where the quantum computer could be useful to everyone, but I think it's coming in the near future. So these problems, which is on the right side, requiring a first fault-tolerant generation of 100,000 to 20 million qubits, financial derivative price in recent article or publication with participation of Goldman Sachs, quantum chemistry problems, which are very important for a lot of things, and of course, famous problem of decryption of the internet. So all of that brings me to the completion of my speech. So again, I believe that universe is a computer and we can solve a lot of human problems with better computers. New computers require new advanced materials. Even quantum computers require new advanced materials. They're computers with materials today are really bulky and primitive. One way to scale quantum computers is just to produce very cheap qubits and very cheap multi-qubit modules and combine them into a very large number of such. New computers require to build completely new hardware. New computers require a lot of software to design them. That's very important because that's one of the reasons of Moore's law, is the fact that we use computers and use software on those computers to design new computers, which would be used in extent to design new computers. And then new computers require software to run them, and most importantly, they require applications which will leverage them. And this is interconnected ecosystem, so one is connected to another, so it will take a little bit of time to get it all done. However, we believe it's very perspective. That's why we founded SIT, which is science, technology, and education in a single place, computers, physics, and business in a single place, working on the future of computing. This is the areas of our focus. Again, I'm not going to repeat Andrea too much here, but we believe that you cannot build new computers without physics, and you cannot make them successful without business. And that is the areas of our focus. This may look like a lot, but really, in order to build good autonomous machine, and right now SIT is participating and winning in first autonomous race, robo-race, you need most of those disciplines working together. How we accomplish that? First of all, we accomplish that with very important members of SIT network, which are not only our advisors, but directly involved in helping us to build SIT and to build it into global collaboration, both on a science standpoint, computers, quantum technology, computer science, business science, board of directors, executive boards, industry board, SIT union. All of these people are exactly what make it possible for us to attract people and students to make SIT possible to work on the future of computing. And with that, I completed my speech. So, what can you do now? You can, still work with Acronis. Acronis is something which is tightly involved with SIT, even though it's a separate company. You can join SIT as a researcher or faculty, or help as an investor or sponsor. We are looking for students. We have 44 students this year. We will have more students next year. Why to become a student or PhD or postdoc? Well, because there are these three very different ways. One way is to win a Turing Award, and here is Alan Turing, and then another way is to get 2 Nobel Prizes, and that's certainly what we expect will happen in SIT with some of our participants, or you can build a great company like Google. For all of it, you need business, computers, and physics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergei. So many learnings and takeaways from that. That was amazing. I'm sure that all of our academic and business communities have enjoyed your talk. I want to encourage you all. We've already had a lot of questions come in, but I'd like to encourage you to continue to send those in so that we can continue this great discussion during the Q&A session. All right, next I would like to invite Professor Konstantin Novoselov to the stage. He is a professor at the Center for Advanced 2D Materials at National University of Singapore, as well as the School of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Manchester. Now, as we mentioned earlier, his work on graphene won him the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2010. Through his research, Professor Novoselov demonstrates how science goes interdisciplinary in order to create a better world for us. But let's better let him explain. Professor, over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for introduction. And generally, I avoid giving talks on the future research. I much prefer to talk about what has been done in my lab recently. But for today, I'll make an exception, and I'll talk about the future of materials, exactly the materials which will be needed for quantum technologies, but also for other future technologies. And I'll talk about the functional intelligent materials. So, but rather than to give you a direct vision straight away, let me tell you about my vision back in mine and for many other people as well. Vision back, which we had back in 1991, what we thought how 2029 will look like. So back then, I hope you remember this movie, but back then we were hoping that in 2029 we will have robots which will be agile, flexible, transformative, self-healing, self-repairing. That's where we are now. So 2020, we still got 10 years to go, but I really doubt that even if you spend a lot of money on the current technology, we will ever get to those robots from the Terminator movies. And the reason is that there are fundamentally different approaches to technology. So what we have now is the so-called top-down functionality, top-down approach, when the functionality, what you actually need those robots to do, is coming only on the top, on the structural level. In Terminator, the functionality is very much bottom up. It really comes from the properties of the materials themselves, and that's exactly what our technology cannot do now at all. So currently, what we have in technology is that despite how complex are the individual parts, they're completely non-functional on their own. They start functioning only when they're assembled into a final structure, like in this clockwork, and only then they start to produce some useful work. And this is of course true not only for the watchmaking or for the robotics. If you think about it, all the technology which we have around us are built on this principle of the top-down functionality. Electronics, silicon itself doesn't do much. So silicon is just a material. The functionality comes on the structural level when you make it into a chip. Membranes and coatings. So you have the structures of our membranes these days is extremely complex, but individual layers they don't do much, and so on and so on and so on. And this approach, the top-down functionality approach, really brings a lot of problems with it. So it's not adaptive. It's prone to faults. It requires constant control. It's energy inefficient and so on. From another hand, if you look at how nature does it, you will see that the functionality is actually distributed continuously across all the levels, from the most basic proteins to membranes in the cells, to cellular level organs, body. So you have different functionalities assigned to the different levels. And that's what we call the functionality starting at the material level. And it really makes biological systems adaptive, versatile, they can self-heal, they can be energy efficient, and so on. So the question is, can we produce, can we mimic such bottom-up functionality for our modern technology? And that's where we come with the functional intelligent materials. So functional means that they can be programmed to perform quite a complex response to external stimuli. Intelligent means that they would have memory, they can learn to perform a particular function, they can be responsive to environment, but also learn from environment, and so on. So I thought that maybe it's easier to give you a couple of examples of such materials. So imagine we have a membrane which consists of two-dimensional materials and some polymers, for example, polyelectrolytes, and we can arrange those two-dimensional sheets of materials in such a way that the nanopores created could be used for, say, water filtration. But then imagine your water source is contaminated. For example, there is someone spilled a bottle of acid in your water source. Then your polyelectrolyte would immediately sense the presence of the protons, the increased acidity, the reduced pH. It would change its conformation, and it would close the pores, completely blocking the water flow, the water permeation. And this is not, it's not just science fiction. We're doing this just we published our first paper on such smart membranes just a couple of weeks ago. Here is another example. This is from a colleague of mine here in the National University of Singapore, Guy Bazan. It's the combination of bacteria, those green cylinders, and conductive polymers, or for example, or graphene scaffolding. And here again we have very agile, very adaptive system. Those bacteria, due to the evolution pressure, they emit electrons. So there's this yellow ball, and then this electrode is just transferred by the conductive polymer, which is also adaptive and can grow by itself into the circuit. So and because those bacteria, they actually developed and they grow together with the circuitry by the evolution pressure, so they actually learn how to produce more and more electricity. So again, an example of very adaptive material, very adaptive composite. And we would really like to transfer this approach on the functional intelligent materials to many other areas of technology, say in electronics, with the neuromorphic computers, membranes. I gave you an example, bio and healthcare, rather than say creating an artificial kidney, which is just a bag, a dialysis bag. You would actually make a proper material which can self-heal energy, and so on. So the problem is, so I mean, of course, it's really sounds nice and exciting. The problem is that it's extremely challenging to create and to design such materials, because for materials to be adaptive, to learn from environment, they necessarily need to be out of equilibrium. Out of equilibrium means that they would change their structure depending on environment and have memory. So here are just a few examples of such out of equilibrium processes. We do know them, and we do observe them in nature, but it's actually not that easy to simulate, and it's not that easy to predict and especially design. The one on the right is the famous example of out of equilibrium chemical reactions, Serguei Beloussov, Zhabotinsky reaction, and generally we cannot we cannot predict, we cannot design such reactions and such materials on demand, because most of the approaches which we have in science give you inequilibrium properties, the most ground state properties. So anything above that, anything beyond and above is extremely complex, extremely complicated. So really what we're trying to do in our work is to create the new framework and the new approach in physics, which would be able to describe the dynamic, the out of equilibrium properties of materials, the functionality. So functionality is a property which exists in time, and that's the most challenging task for modern physics. And then we're also trying to solve the inverse problem as well, how to predict the structure of a material depending on the functionality you wanted to do. And for myself, I put this task as how close can we arrive to mimicking the biological functionality, starting from the non-biological components. So so we do know the basic ways how to do it. First of all, if you create a material from components, you use the composite material approach. You need to provide strong interaction between the individual components, but also what you need is that this interaction would go through multiple channels, because if it goes through the multiple channels, you would be able to create a degenerate landscape, the degenerate energy landscape, which is the prerogative for the memory function. Just let me briefly explain you why this degenerate landscape is important, and why is it and why do we want it to occur in our materials. So, and I'll give you an example of the proteins. So proteins are the molecules in your body, which are it's organic molecules, usually it's quite a long polymer, and it can interact with different parts would interact through different energy channels like Coulomb, elastic, hydrogen bonds, and so on. Because those molecules alone, they can fold into different configurations, and different configurations of folding would do different functions. But also those configurations would have different energy, and through this energy control, you can control the function itself. And solving this problem and that's exactly why they're so versatile, they're so useful in our body, because they can quickly change its configuration and then carry some chemicals from one side to another, or allow some ions through, or just open and close some pores. So this ability to quickly change configurations, because it has the energy positions of those configurations are very similar, is extremely important. And solving the protein folding problem is extremely challenging task. So just only a couple of weeks ago, the ground state, the lowest state for the proteins has been solved using the AlphaFold program. And what actually do we need is to solve all the other energy states as well, and figure out the transitions between them. And that's the sort of work which we're trying to do. So in order to create those materials, what we're doing, we're identifying materials without bulk, because if you bring two materials together, they interact only on the surface. The bulk is a complete ballast, so it doesn't do anything useful at all. So we have the zero-dimensional materials like cage molecules, quantum dots, small molecules. We have one-dimensional like carbon nanotubes, polymers, polyelectrolytes, like two-dimensional materials, even three-dimensional materials without bulks like MOFs, metal organic frameworks, and COVs. We also actually work with some live material like some small cells, bacteria, viruses, and so on. But then the biggest trick is how to make them to interact, to form an active material, a material which would be influenced by external environment with certain stimuli, produce the response, but also produce the feedback. So the very structure of this material would change as well, and that would bring the memory function to it. And then, if we are successful with this, you can try to apply it for different applications. So this assembly rule, so how to make those materials to interact, is the most challenging, because currently we simply haven't got an approach to do it. The modern physics doesn't give you any tools, any rules how to calculate the out of equilibrium properties. So that's why we have to combine the existing physics approach, like the density functional theory or the usual constraints, with the dynamic machine learning, because that would be able to explore the particular energy landscape and make predictions on the stable and unstable states, memory states, and so on. I'm not going to go much into details, but also you necessarily would need to combine it with some large throughput synthesis, like robotics lab, and that's what we also do in our work. But then once you create those, you would be able to apply those materials in really many sectors, very many sectors of our modern technologies, starting from electronics, energy, membranes, and coatings. So I would just give you a few example of those. For example, you can make image recognition on the material level. If you create a material which has which acts as a memristor, both on the due to influence of the current and light, you can make image recognition on material level, or you can create smart membranes. Or, for example, I'll just give you one example of such a smart material. For example, you can create a scroll which would carry a drug molecule with it, and then we can teach this scroll to open or close depending on the environment, and then you can design and program it to pass, say, through your stomach and through the bloodstream, and open up and deliver this drug molecule only at the particular position. So another example of our work is the smart antiviral coatings, which actually sense the presence of the virus and release certain chemicals to kill the virus once it is landed on its surface. And this is a good example of our collaboration with the SAT. So we started to test our coatings during the joint venture, and some of them can kill at least 90% of the virus which present. So I think I will stop here, and I will say that I would like to say that this new approach which we are trying to produce to offer functional intelligent materials will, of course, produce a new paradigm in science out of equilibrium materials, but also it will change many technologies which we're using now, and I hope we'll make them much more efficient. Thank you so much. Anna Maria, back to you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for those insights. It's inspiring to hear that even after 10 years, that your work on graphene was recognized by the Nobel Prize. Your research continues to expand, so congratulations for that. A big thank you to all of you for tuning in. We have now more than 600 live attendees, so great. I want to quickly remind all of you that at the end of each session, we will have that live Q&A with our speakers, so stay connected, send them in. We'll pick the best answers or the best questions to answer them live. And we're getting a lot of interesting questions, this is true, but some more tech-related questions would always and also keep the conversation moving. All right, so now I'm excited to present our third keynote speaker of the session, Professor Christopher Monroe. He is Professor of Physics at the University of Maryland and Duke University, founder of IonQ Incorporation, and he's been on the forefront of quantum information technology for more than 20 years. The floor is yours, Professor Monroe.
Thank you, Anna Maria, and thank you, Sergei and the others for having me here. So again, it's my great pleasure to be here, especially in front of such a large and esteemed audience. I'm glad Sergei spoke before me. He could have given half of my talk an introduction to quantum computing. So I will give a little bit of a different version, but I want to drill down into a particular leading technology in that area. And Sergei hinted at this, using individual atoms as a new platform for computing and performing computations that will always be impossible with classical means. As Anna Maria mentioned, I come from both University of Maryland and moving to Duke University very soon. But I'll also touch base with a startup company, IonQ, that I co-founded, that is leading the path in building scalable quantum computers. So in the broad field of quantum information science, there are many so-called pillars, different applications, and I think we're going to hear a lot about these today. Sergei gave a very high-level outline of some of the areas. I'm going to key on quantum computing in particular, partly because to me, these four areas, if you're going to make progress in any one, it's going to hit all of them. In particular, computing and simulation are really the same thing with a different degree of tunability. Simulators are restricted class quantum computers, if you will, and a quantum computer being a universal device, it can simulate anything. Of course, it's harder to make one of these as well. Maybe not as appreciated as the connection between quantum computing and quantum networks, quantum communication. This goes two ways. If you want to build a big quantum computer, it will be networked, it will be modular, and you will have to learn and exploit protocols to move information, likely through optical photons, integrated photonics, and so forth. Likewise, if you want to build a quantum internet or a long distance quantum communication network, you can't amplify quantum signals due to something called the quantum no cloning theorem. But you can repeat, you can make a quantum repeater, which is just a small quantum computer at every, periodically installed along the network. So you're going to need to do, if you want to do computing, you have to do communication. If you want to do long distance communication, you have to do computing. And sensing, of course, hits all of these areas, needing to measure states with very high fidelity. You might need a quantum computer to prepare a particular quantum state that is extremely sensitive to a force or some external influence that you're trying to detect. So I'm going to concentrate on quantum computing. It is perhaps the most abstract of these four. And the reason is a computer is abstract. When computers were first built, there were very few known applications. And the same is true in quantum computing. We can envision a few. I'll mention this a bit, but it will probably be used in ways that we can't imagine right now. Perhaps along the lines that Kostya just mentioned on designing new materials, and maybe we can simulate those materials with quantum computers and understand their functionality this way. So to give you a little more background, we're all very familiar with classical computing and its evolution over the last 50 to 60 years or so. It's often codified in Moore's law, the doubling in transistor density every couple of years. This is a plot of Moore's law on a log plot with over time, just over the last 30 years or 30 or 40 years. And indeed, we have this exponential growth. We get a factor of 10 every 5 years or something like that. It's certainly tapering off over the last many years. And this is largely due to the fact that the transistors are getting so small that they're starting to encroach, well, the granularity of matter. I'd like to quote Richard Feynman here, who, as an early visionary in the field, way back in the mid-20th century, he noted that when we get to the very small world, there are new opportunities for computer design. So even though Moore's law hadn't even been named by then or as a concept, Feynman recognized that if we get to circuits of individual atoms, for instance, there will be new opportunities. And it's because the laws of physics are completely different at those scales. It's not exactly the scale. It's the fact that when you get to such simple matter with very few degrees of freedom, the laws of physics are called quantum physics, and they're completely different. So you may, Serguei introduced the concept of a quantum bit or a qubit. It allows information to be stored in superposition. So in a sense, there's a massive parallel processing behind all this. So a quantum computer is nothing more than a collection of quantum bits that are very well controlled, and they can be prepared in interesting superpositions called entangled superpositions. And from a high level, I think of how a quantum computer works. You know, Feynman didn't understand, and nobody understood in the mid-20th century how this would come together. It was really not until the 1990s that this came together. So I think of this story as a good news, bad news, good news story, and here it is. So the first piece of good news, when you put lots of qubits together, is that you can do indeed this parallel processing. For instance, if there are 3 quantum bits, there are 8 possibilities, 8 possible numbers with 3 bits, and we can store them at the same time. A little jargon down here, sorry, but this is quantum language. It's a superposition of all 8 binary numbers. And in a block diagram, you might have different weightings in front of those superpositions, and you can compute a single function in parallel. You can compute all the inputs, outputs of all the inputs on some function in parallel. That's great. Well, 8 is not so big, but if we have 300 qubits, which also doesn't sound so big, there's 2 to the power 300 possibilities here. That is big. That's more than the number of atoms in the entire universe, all 13 billion light years of the universe in all directions. So that type of a computation we'll never be able to deal with using classical means, no matter how far Moore's law goes. The universe is too small to consider such possibilities. Okay, so that's amazing news, of course, but the bad news is, what is a quantum superposition anyway when you look at it? And a good computer you have to be able to look at the outputs. And so the bad news is, and this is one of the fundamental tenets of quantum, when you measure a quantum superposition, you get noise in general. It randomly assumes a given value. And because of that randomness, the output here that you measure, it really has no meaning, because you have no idea what input corresponded to the output, okay? So typical one-to-one functions where every input gives a unique output, these are not going to get a speed up in quantum computing. So this is where things stood, I think, for a long time. Feynman probably recognized this right away, but it wasn't until the 1990s that David Deutsch, among others, started hinting at ideas where quantum computers could do something really powerful. And I can see my arrows in the wrong place here. So what Deutsch and others showed is that before you measure a quantum superposition, you manipulate the quantum system, and these quantum weights, they can interfere just like a wave interferes. And there's a lot of math and a wave equation behind this. It's just math. It's not so difficult to do that math, except it scales exponentially, because there are exponentially many paths here. These orange dots are quantum gates. They allow the interferences to be steered, to be controlled. And this is what a quantum computer basically does. It controls interference without looking, without measuring. And then some problems can be cast in a form of gates, such that the output, even before measurement, there's a massive interference that a single output can depend on all the inputs. And again, this arrow is supposed to point to the white dot. That's where the output comes out. So there's no randomness anymore in that type of algorithm. So there turns out there is a class of problems that can be cast in this form. And let me give you two examples. The most famous, and this is really what put quantum computing on the map 25 years ago, is the factoring algorithm discovered by Peter Shor. Now, factoring is a very hard problem classically. We don't have algorithms that are efficient at factoring large numbers. Small numbers, easy. We memorize them, I guess. Or we have an exhaustive search on all the prime numbers below the square root of the number, the target number, to see if it factors. But a big number, this is actually not very big, but a big number with 1,000 digits would take on the order of the age of the universe to factor. So factoring is a hard problem. Peter Shor showed that a quantum computer, if built, would be able to factor fast. And of course, factoring it underlies most of our data encryption methods these days. So factoring is actually a very important problem. Now, the way at a very high level a quantum computer attacks factoring is if you have a target number you want to factor, you store it, and you store a superposition of all the numbers up to maybe a little more than the number you're trying to factor. But you have a wave function that sort of has all these numbers in superposition. Of course, you can't look at it. You can't measure. You have to isolate the quantum system extremely well. And then you apply gates in a certain way, and there should not be exponentially many gates. And that's what Peter Shor showed. You can do it with a polynomial number of gates, making the problem so-called easy, or at least it's not exponential. And a quantum computer changes the wave function to something like this. And then you can measure. Once you measure this wave function, you're going to get one of the factors of the number you're trying to factor. So that's how it works from a very high level. There's lots of machinery underneath it involving gates and so forth. But that's a very clear case of quantum speed up. Now, factoring, unfortunately, to factor a really big number requires lots and lots of qubits and lots of operations. And we're not there with the technology yet. That's a different story. But happily, there are likely many other types of problems that can be cast in this form. That is, the output depends on all the inputs. And one very broad class is called optimization. Sergei hinted at this as well. An easy optimization problem here is if you look at a 2D landscape and ask the question, where's the tallest peak? You can simply by inspection see it. It's the tallest mountain. Well, this is a function of only two variables, latitude and longitude. If I give you a function with 10,000 variables and ask for what are the variables that maximize or minimize that function, let's say you're doing financial arbitrage and you want to optimize some portfolio model function that's nonlinear, you're out of luck. That's a combinatorially hard problem. Other problems that are, of course, there are broad swaths of problems in all sectors of the economy that have optimization problems, including science. And again, Sergei hinted at this. Simulating chemistry involves electrons that themselves optimize where they're going to be on the spine of a big molecule. Even this caffeine molecule is really hard to simulate. We cannot analytically calculate the binding energy of a caffeine molecule, and that only has about 100 electrons. This molecule over here is called FIMOCO. It's a molybdenum iron-based material that fixes nitrogen. It creates ammonia, and that's very useful for fertilizer. In fact, a couple of percent of the world's energy goes into a very high temperature and pressure process to make ammonia, where we know bacteria can do it at standard, very cheaply, and it's thought to be controlled by molecules like this. And understanding the dynamics or even the static, the binding energy of this molecule is of incredible importance to society. Now, logistics problems like traveling salesmen, these are another class of known hard combinatoric problems. We don't think quantum computers can actually solve these exactly, but it remains to be seen whether they can give better approximations than are available classically. So, this is research unto its own. So I want to pivot over toward experiments, and there's an interesting culture in quantum computing experiments, and I think much of it doesn't recognize that quantum computers are so much different than the computers we have today. They're even more different than the computers we have today are different from an abacus. These two computers, the laptop and the abacus, they're both classical Turing machines. One is a lot faster than the other. And one, the abacus, we never even use, but they follow the same physical laws of computing. There's a memory, and Alan Turing showed an abstract model of any classical computer that way. Well, a quantum computer is not a classical Turing machine. It's entirely different at the fundamental level. And I think the corollary to that is, why the hell would you build a quantum computer out of things that make a laptop? That's not necessarily the case. In fact, I would argue it's probably not going to be the case. So there are many technologies out there that are being investigated to build quantum computers. I hinted earlier, the big problem, it is isolation. When you do the computation, you cannot look, and not just you, the environment cannot, information cannot leak out of the system. So the most popular system right now that is being investigated, especially by companies, are superconducting loops. These are fairly exotic compared to the laptop because they have to be cooled to almost 0 degrees. But they're also made out of solid state. You cannot replicate individual qubits based on solid state systems, because the solid state qubit has 10 to the 15 atoms in it, and there's noise. If you've ever looked under a electron microscope of a transistor, it looks hairy, and everyone is different, like people. This culture I'm mentioning is that I think we need to look even more exotic than that. And I think individual atoms, neutral atoms, or charged atoms, things like diamond vacancies, these are solid state devices that look a lot like atoms, photons. But these natural quantum systems have yet to be controlled at the level of solid state systems, but that's basically due to a lack of engineering, not quantum. So I'm going to talk about trapped ions for a little bit in particular. Now, trapped ions are the cleanest quantum system known, and it's for a simple reason. We store qubits inside the atoms. They're basically atomic clocks, so they're perfectly replicable. When they're idle, they are perfect. There is zero decoherence of an isolated atom in a vacuum chamber, so there's no collisions with the background gas. And there's a reason why atoms are the best frequency standards, that we make our best clocks on atoms. Now, ions in particular are nice because they're charged. We can hold on to them based on their charge, and that doesn't in any way disturb the qubit inside. Now, neutral atoms are maybe the next best platform, but to hold on to a neutral atom and isolate it, you have to distort it because it's neutral. And when you distort it, you distort the qubit inside just a little bit. So that's an extra noise process. So ions have an isolation that is really unmatched in all physical systems. I think I know why people, especially companies, are a little bit afraid of trapped ions. They're based on very sophisticated control engineering. I wouldn't even say this is engineering. This is a university laboratory, and that's where trapped ions have been up until about five years ago. This is one of my labs from 2015. And the atoms, obviously they occupy a tiny, tiny volume in space here, but everything else, the lasers, especially the lasers, but the controls, the optics, it's pretty severe. And this, I think, maybe scares away big companies from thinking about engineering this. Well, I would point to silicon. In the early days, you all know this beautiful physics picture of the first, this is a germanium solid state transistor. That looks pretty bad. You can't imagine that this thing could be through very large scale integration, we could scale this up to billions of transistors by shrinking things down. We had to invent engineering technologies. And I know this is from a very high level, but the physics of the transistor over here is exactly the same as the physics over here. So we don't need breakthroughs in physics. We did need breakthroughs in materials and so forth. And once we learned how we were going to scale a particular technology, it just took off. Well, without much exaggeration, this picture here in just a few years became this, which is still a little unwieldy. It's a big meter cube box, but we've, for the first time, engineered an ion trap to be autonomous. It's inside this box. There's a lot of optics in there, but at the core is a silicon chip here that is called an ion trap. And the silicon chip is gold plated. There's nothing quantum about the chip, nothing quantum whatsoever. It's not even cold. It's at room temperature. It's in a vacuum. We have a vacuum environment, and atoms are floating above this chip, and they're nearly perfectly isolated from the environment. This chip comes from Sandia National Laboratories in the US, but it's completely conventionally machined with using silicon fabrication facilities. We know how to build these things. There are many different competing designs. At its core, this is how a quantum computer works based on trapped ions. We have a bunch of laser beams that are being directed on each atom. The atoms are just sitting there. They sit there all day, and we're plucking these atoms with laser beams. We can initialize their quantum state using a particular laser beam, and then we execute an algorithm on up right here. Time goes to the right, and these are gates. And we're actually pushing the atoms around with these focused laser beams, executing a quantum algorithm or a quantum circuit. And this can be done in a scalable way. And notably, you don't need nearest neighbor interactions. Any pair of ions will take place. It's like plucking a guitar string. The whole string takes part in the vibration. And then at the end of the day, we can measure the quantum bits very efficiently. And when they glow, that's a 1. When they don't glow, that's a 0. That's it. Those are the 3 steps of a quantum computer. And with trapped ions, we can really abstract the hardware away and start to program it using gates and algorithms and form this so-called full stack where we can start to make compilers and very powerful software. And I don't have time to go through all the science we've been doing at the university, all kinds of collaborations from companies, labs, universities. 2020 is a very busy year, lots of work. People want to use these devices because they're higher performing than any other computer out there. Again, I'm going to skip through these, but what the point here is these fields are not atomic physics. It's not optics. It's fields that are far away from, well, my expertise anyway. So this is a very exciting field right now. And we know how to scale this up even in a modular way by mapping to photons between different chips. But I wanted to talk very briefly before quitting about IonQ. This is clearly a very fruitful commercial venture. And IonQ is a startup that was started 3 or 4 years ago. We're venture funded, and we have about 65 employees, and we've built several generations of quantum computer systems. And again, I'm going to skip through many of these things, but one aspect of the control we have over these systems is this is an automatic loading of exactly 24 qubits on a single chip. Each atom is loaded one at a time and scooted through the chip. And you'll see when too many get in there, the TV recognizes how many. They're zigzagged right now. We're just loading exactly 24. That was programmed. And now we stretch out the chain. We refocus the optics all automatically. Now we're ready to go. We can execute circuits. Okay. Now, systems like this at IonQ have been put on the cloud. You can actually run these algorithms yourself. Both Amazon Web Services, AWS, and Microsoft have offered this. And at IonQ, we're busy looking at plans to scale based on more complicated chip type programs. And also, as I mentioned, these photonic interconnects didn't have time to talk about, but I just want to quit by saying that at IonQ, we're scaling, we're adding qubits, but the system is getting smaller from the laboratory scale to a rack mount type architecture, even very small chips. And you can think about modularly having integrated photonics on these systems. That's in the future, but it looks very promising. And the point I want you to leave with is that this is not physics here. The physics of the atom is done. We're not going to learn anything more about the atom here. It's all about scaling and engineering to get to the future. So this is my last slide. It's a little bit of a joke. It comes from the cover of MIT Tech Review. I think they were talking about blockchain, but quantum computing isn't, it is an overhyped field for sure. But despite the hype, there's great hope. And not only that, huge opportunities, because there are a whole class of problems that we will never solve using conventional computers that only quantum computers can solve if we get there. So thanks, and I will send it back over to you, Anna Maria. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. That's I really like that. The future is that sweet spot between hype and hope. Thank you also for all of the amazing learnings, notably the part about the trapped atomic ions as a unique quantum computing physical platform. Wow. Okay, all right, as promised, now we are going to proceed with the most exciting part of the session when we invite back our thought leaders from science, technology, and business and address those questions that everyone has been sending in nonstop since we started. So Serguei, Christopher, and Konstantin, welcome. back. All right, let's get started. We have the first one is for Serguei. How do you ensure that you and your staff do not get overwhelmed with the growth and ensure that you do not compromise on quality at SIT?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think, first of all, we have this group of people involved, which sort of occupy our boards, and they help us to not make bad decisions. The most important part here is not to have not excellent students or not excellent faculty. Second is that we simply do not grow very fast. So this is quite different. My career for the past 28 years, I'm building businesses, and SIT is a very different venture in the way that you have to go in stages. In academic world, it's year is a simple sort of one stage, and so we're not moving too fast. And I guess the last thing which is important, I think we all as humans overstate importance of ourselves, but more often than not, it's about choosing the right opportunity. Rising tide raises all boats. Here we have unquestionable opportunity in computer science and artificial intelligence specifically, another unquestionable opportunity in quantum technology, which perhaps was overhyped 20 years ago, but is now definitely an area of huge hope and, in fact, opportunity. And then exciting area of advanced materials. And these areas are just helping us to choose the people. But all comes to people.
All right, thank you. This next question is addressed to both Christopher and Serguei. Basically related, it refers to articles where it talks about how Chinese quantum computer completed 2.5 billion year task in minutes. Could we hypothesize then that quantum computers could somehow predict coronavirus spreading patterns? Who wants to take it?
Maybe I'll start with that. Indeed, there was a result from a few weeks ago. It follows on from an experiment a couple of years ago at Google that were, and I think Sergei touched on this, these are very specialized applications that the machine was tailored. It wasn't a universal machine in a way. It was tailored to solve this particular problem. Both milestones, I would say, were rather academic in the sense that they, Scott Aronson maybe today will talk more about that. They were academic in the sense that it proved that a quantum computer could do something, anything, that a classical computer would struggle at. I would say it's a little academic because I think if we believe in quantum mechanics, as long as we believe that's the correct theory, then it's not really a surprise. These algorithms were not tunable, and they're very specific. So I think in terms of, say, an industrial use on a real world problem, like modeling, even at the molecular level, the coronavirus itself. But I think this is more of a logistics issue. I think you need a very programmable system to do something like that. And these demonstrations are steps along the way, but nothing more than that.
Sergei, would you like to add something?
Well, I mean, that's sort of remember this picture from Chris' presentation, hype versus hope. So this is from the hype type area. So you have a lot of different ways to predict the virus spread. And, we definitely are very far from solving. I mean, think about it. This virus is a tiny little thing, and it killed, hundreds of thousands, millions of people at the end. And it's something we should be able to fight with better computers, and we should be able to come up with drugs very quickly. There are possibly drugs. There are some antiviral drugs today which are, somehow efficient, not very efficient, but we don't have enough capacity to make it more precision. We should also be able to come up with vaccines faster, and we should also be able to, and that's exactly right, calculate and demonstrate to people which sanitary measures and which quarantine measures are actually necessary and what happens precisely. Not like, you see, people always like, well, that's just your opinion. If I don't wear a mask, it's your opinion that this will be a problem. But if you can precisely calculate and show that it's not an opinion, it's just how it is, perhaps more people will actually follow the quarantine measures. So again, it's a long answer. I don't think the quantum computer is required to help us against COVID-19, but they could have been useful.
All right, thank you, Sergei. I've got one for Konstantin. First of all, they give you a shout out. So great topic, very clear explanation. So thanks a lot, Professor, and greetings from St. Gallen. Okay, the question is, what can you say about thermoelectronics as quantum materials? Do you have an insight to the future of low-dimensional TE devices?
It's of course a very rich area, and there are lots of people working on it. And tandem thermoelectronics is something which is being actively developed. And I guess the work is now being developed in two basic directions. One is to find materials with better thermoelectric properties, and so it's been active for decades, and the figure of merit improves all the time, though probably not as fast as we would like it to be. But the second one is to make it more efficient systems and integrated into as many devices as possible to feed on the ambient energy. And I think this it will be really one of the largest trends in the future, trying to collect ambient energy either from heat or from vibrations, from running water, from ambient light, and so that part of the work is not as active as the material development. And I really hope that the functional intelligent material would be able to catch up on both.
And Konstantin, if we can just follow up, is there any slight possibility to build a transistor on the subatomic particle level?
I'm not sure whether you. I'm sure that there is a way how to build a transistor on the subatomic particle. The problem is that currently we need large hadron collider to operate with that. I don't think we explored all the capabilities of the normal computers or the quantum computers before we need to go to the subatomic particle.
Okay, there's actually one more part to that question, which is why would you need the linking of a quantum repeaters in a network? Could entanglement be used for communication of complex state to be used instead?
Well, I think it's Chris who would need to answer it. So he's much better expert on this. But basically, there is a finite decoherence time, so you need you still and there is a finite absorption in any system. So you need quantum repeaters these days.
But beside repeaters, I think about the network, sorry, Chris, I intervened. The problem is that unless you have a quantum network, in order for people to communicate, we have to have point-to-point location. Imagine every person communicates with 1,000 people. I have to have like 1,000 connections. That's impossible to have. Like I have location to Chris and to Kostya and to you and to, to organizers. So you need a seamless architecture to the modern internet, and for that you need not just a repeater, but you need a router and you need a switch. Yeah, go on, Chris.
Just setting up the entanglement at long distance. Just the simplest case, just A to B. If it's long distance, you have to think about how you set that up to begin with. And I don't think there's any other way than to have stations along the way. That I think Kostya says. I mean, you have finite time to do it, but also you can't. I mean, you could make the entanglement in a lab and then take one half of it and get on the airplane and somehow not look at it and not have it interact. I guess you could do it that way. That would be very slow. but clearly photons are fast, and it seems like optical networking is the way to go. And the problem with photons is that even through optical fibers, you can't go more than a few kilometers. Through space, it's a lot easier. You can go thousands of kilometers, and so maybe we'll see a network of satellites that can do this more easily, but they'll have the same protocols.
So, Chris, can we detect quantum entanglement then between particles without altering their state?
Any quantum detection has to be statistical. If you look at a quantum system one time, it's sort of like looking at a coin toss, flipping the coin once and being asked to tell you, is the coin fair or not? If you only flip it once, you can't say anything. So you have to do it in a statistical way. So you have to measure correlations over and over again to prove you have entanglement. Of course, once you think you have entanglement, you have to have faith that you can make it again, and then you use it for other things. So it's always a statistical measure of both. I'm not sure I answered your follow-up, but.
I also just wanted to add, gentlemen, that if you have, as Serguei did earlier, if you have something to add to a question we've asked one of the other guests, feel free, raise your hand, jump in, not a problem. I actually have another question to you, Chris, from the SIT Provost, Bertrand Mayer. He wants to know, how do you program these beasts?
Programming a quantum computer is basically setting up the gates that you need to have qubits interact with. We typically initialize all the quantum bits in a standard state, 0 or whatever. A qubit is a 2-level system, and if we cool the system to be all in the state 0, then we unleash the gates. And these are conditional operations, and the pattern of the gates depends on the algorithm. That's an area unto itself, quantum computer science, and so forth. So the programming is always an external control that, as I said, it doesn't expose the qubit, it just does something to it. And one example, this is a very very basic example. I like coins. If you think of a coin, let's say the coin is 30-70. It's weighted 30% heads and 70% tails, and it's in a superposition of the two states. You can think of it flipping really fast. It's sort of like both. How do you change the 30-70 weight to be 70-30? You're like flipping the qubit. How do you change that without looking at it? Well, if it's in a black box, you just flip the box over without looking at it, and you've just changed the odds. So quantum operations gates are like that. They're operations from the outside that steer the quantum system without taking information out. That's how you program a quantum computer.
And so Christopher likes coins, but in reality, he meant bitcoins. And to fund IonQ, he needs multiple bitcoins, $1 billion each.
The dollars are, I'll take the dollars though. That's fine.
Dollars also work. Costa, I have, Konstantin, I have someone also asking, switching gears just a little bit, how is SIT partnering with public-private companies to enable technological breakthroughs?
Well, so SIT is a very special university where the labs and research is intrinsically connected to education, but most important, it's connected to the innovation. And so the above the SIT university, there is an SIT fund and which would own and develop those startup companies. And what is important about startup companies are, of course, ideas, but probably even more the people, and that's quite often what is missing in the other universities. So SIT will bring external CEOs to start working on a fast pace from day one. The idea appeared.
All right, thank you. Now, this is a question that you probably get, all of you, I don't know, it sounds like a question that you probably get often, but will we have quantum photon computers on the market in the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's, maybe I'm the least scientific of the participants, so I can freely answer with forward-looking statements. So first of all, I think they're already available on the market to some extent, and then I think next year people will be able to buy, some happy people, and order quantum computers from multiple teams which are promising. And in 2022, definitely there will be multiple designs promising. The important thing is not the quantum computer itself as a device which uses quantum effects to perform computation. That is going to be possible next year, but you can buy it and actually you can install it in your home. There is this misconception that quantum computers are very expensive. So that's not actually true. They don't have to be expensive. How expensive is to have 300 neutral atoms? They are free. I mean, we are surrounded by quadrillions of atoms. Many of them, most of them are neutral. But the important thing is that you can buy it for probably several $1 million, or in some designs even less. And you can install it at your home. You can look at it. The question is what you can do with it. That's a different question. You cannot do too much next year yet, I think. But in 5 years, you can definitely do many useful things. That's my opinion. Forward-looking statement.
Let me add one aspect of the question. I think the question also was specific to photonic quantum computers. There is a model of a quantum computer that involves only photons, which is amazing.
Photonic. Okay.
Because photons, of course, they're great because they can even go through air without being observed, certainly in a vacuum. But even in optical fiber, as I said before, they can go through many meters of optical fiber with no decoherence at all. They're beautiful quantum systems for transport. So there are models for computing. The problem is all our models of computing need memory. You need to store the Turing machine, the classical Turing machine. You have a memory and a tape, and then you have a head that changes bits. Even photons, to compute, you need memory. And so what they do is they have fiber spools where the photons go through delay lines. The problem is the speed of light is pretty fast. And so you have a chip, and you have to put effectively many meters of delay line on that chip. So the photonic approaches to computing are still, I would say, unproven. They're experimental. There's some big ideas out there, even companies that are investigating this. But I think without memory, it's going to be very hard without some types of breakthroughs. I think photons will be needed for modularizing any quantum computer. But if you don't have memory, usually matter or spins or atoms or something, if you don't have fixed memory, it's very difficult to do computing. We learned this in the 1980s and 90s with optical classical computing, which never displaced silicon. Some predicted it would, but it didn't. And the simple reason was there was no memory.
Bottom line, the only right way to do quantum computers is cold ions, right, Chris? There is no other way, right?
I think right now they're in the lead.
Just kidding.
No, it's a good question, and it's pointed. I think they're in the lead right now. We can do engineering, but we look forward to the day when there are other platforms. Like I mentioned, NV diamond. This is a beautiful atomic-like defect in diamond. It behaves almost like an atom, but it's in a solid. And you can control it with lasers, very much like we do trapped ions. A lot of the infrastructure to control trapped ions will be directly translatable to that solid state platform that can be packed much more densely, perhaps. People talk about topological qubits. Can there be a natural error-resistant qubit in nature? We know that we can engineer error-resistant qubits by encoding, by using error correction. Is there a natural error correction that happens in matter? This is very researchy. It's more 10 plus years away, but I think with the technology we have now, I think ions are the first that will go out of the gate and do things. And I think eventually it will spawn other technologies. Go back to 1950. Silicon was not in the equation in 1950. It was germanium. It was other semiconductors. Why silicon? Well, I don't know. We invented engineering tricks to scale it up. Gallium arsenide was supposed to be a lot faster than silicon. It had much better mobility. It never beat silicon. We invented how to make sure silicon could do whatever it needed. So we'll see what happens. I think there are lots of technologies out there, and maybe we haven't arrived at the perfect one yet, but we have some hints, and I think it'll be. I think also I'm talking for a long time here, but I think different platforms will have different features that could be used for different applications. So I don't think we necessarily will see that only one platform just beats everybody in all aspects in the end. I think photons, storing information in photons, they travel fast. It's hard to do local computing with them, but if you want to do it across many kilometers, you have to have photons in there. And I think as
so I interrupt you, Chris. I just want to point out that one of the things which we want to do in SIT is to connect different parts of science together. But another thing which we believe can be connected nowadays is fundamental science, applied science, and business. And as a part of this, it's important that there is three groups of deeply confused people about quantum technology and advanced materials. It's executives, which are needed to build business. It's hard to find executives who understand it. Every time I'm investor in multiple quantum computing companies, quantum technology companies, executives need to be educated. It's in entrepreneurs. So not all scientists are entrepreneurs like Chris. And then finally, investors, because it's necessary to raise money. There is a huge market of pools of money which want to invest. But what we want to produce is sort of a taxonomy of quantum technology for investors, executives, and entrepreneurs, which involves, big fields like quantum networking or quantum computing, but maybe subfields like quantum simulators or quantum universal quantum computers or quantum repeaters, because all of these are investable fields, but it's difficult for the investors, executives, and entrepreneurs to navigate through the noise around photonic computers versus, like typical thing which you would hear, like Microsoft supports topological qubits. Okay, must be some reason for it. So it's hard to understand who is going to win and so on and so forth. So we think in SIT we can produce some taxonomy. That's something which you should watch as evolution of my presentation, but in much better organized way, hopefully with help of people like Chris.
All right, wonderful. Konstantin, I've got one for you. 10 years past the Nobel Prize, there's still no theory of graphene. Do you think this is because the old methods failed and we have to develop a new theory for condensed matter physics, both 2D and 3D, based on a new physical principles and using different mathematics?
No, I would say it's not entirely true. The basic reason is that we experimentalists, we work efficiently with this material and uncover new properties and new phenomena. So in principle, we understand quite a lot about graphene. Probably not everything, but definitely enough to start using it for technology. But what we are doing now is to create artificial materials. So the functional intelligent materials is the next level beyond those artificial materials on demand, and those materials indeed produce more and more surprises, and that's good. So if we know everything, it means that science is stagnating. So the fact that we still have puzzles there, so it means that we are developing.
Speaking of puzzles, to you, Konstantin and Chris, is it possible to build some kind of home heating device in the future by implementing quantum material based on Maxwell-Demon principle, which would work like some kind of heat pump?
Wow.
I think I have a different request. Can we at least make a demon which will catch mosquitoes?
What do you guys say?
So I think it is either heating or demon. So it's one or the other. Or so, of course, Maxwell demon will always work as a heater because it will waste energy, unfortunately. So we don't know the ways how to work around this, and we do have materials which which work on the Maxwell-Demon principles. But unfortunately, you have to damp the entropy elsewhere. So I don't think we can cheat on the energy conservation principle. Even the quantum systems can borrow energy only for a short while.
I'll add to that I think the second law of thermodynamics will probably last longer than the laws of quantum mechanics. I think they're more fundamental, and I think everybody subscribes to them. And the second
Chris,
law, of course, forbids these Maxwell's, as Kostka says, they forbid these Maxwell's demons from pumping heat without doing work.
I've got another one for you now that we've got you on. There are some rules to create a good quantum advantage circuit. I use advantage because we are far away from supremacy concept. Over using Z, CZH, swap, U2, U3 gates, and put in different direction angles entangled and near 50% of probability. How can I say my circuit is better than others?
Oh, I think from a high level, and I know where that's going from. So we're in quantum computing, it's sort of like being in the 1940s in classical computers, and people are starting to they're starting to write the Windows operating system before we have hardware that can deal with such a high level expression. So we're not even at assembly language code. We're below that. We're just wiring together the fundamentals. And I think the questioner is asking, there are many different families of gates available that are abstractly, they're all equally powerful. And that's true in classical computing as well. But all hardwares have different native gate sets, and they're all equally expressive, but some are more efficient than others. So this is an optimization problem. It's a very interesting one, because in these early days, you have to squeak out every ounce of efficiency you can. You don't want to do, gates are very expensive, and you don't want to do a lot of them. So my feeling is two things. If you have a particular algorithm and you express it in terms of the textbook gates that you learned, you should think deeper than that. Express them in different types of gates. Maybe you can find operations that are not in the textbook, but correspond to real materials. And those real materials might be better applied to that particular problem. This is called, there's a word for this, it's called co-design. You design the hardware and the application at the same time, and we badly need that now. So the questioner is comparing two different expressions of maybe the same quantum circuit. So it depends on the hardware, it depends on the application, but it's a very fruitful area of research right now. I'd say most of the gains in quantum computer science are on that compiling step. How do you express problems in different ways that might match to different types of hardware?
I do want to add a little bit. I mean, the good thing with quantum computers is we have a sort of a crystal ball now in comparison to a crystal ball with computers, that we do know that as we scale this technology, perhaps there will be higher levels of abstraction. So the instruction sets and assembly language and compilers, and we do know that some of the systems, quantum computers are quantum systems. If you can emulate a quantum computer on a quantum computer, which is what everybody's doing, you can scale it faster. So the bigger quantum computers we get, the easier we'll get to scale them.
All right. Stay on with me, Sergei. I have one for you. What are the latest, most relevant problems on the intersection of economics and quantum computing that could be relevant for the scientific research in the next 3 years?
Well, that's, again, that comes back to the, first of all, my statement that there is no widespread use of quantum computers visible yet. There is many optimization problems. Ultimately, a lot of optimization problems are equal to maximum independent set problem, and to some specific sort of simplifications or complifications. I don't know if there is even such word in English, but making your problem a much bigger graph where you need to find maximum independent set. But again, the one which I see nearby is things related to financial markets and things related to artificial intelligence and other applications of maximum independent set. But there is no precise answer. You hit the person who asked this question hit the nail on the head. But it's really difficult to imagine that at the time when the digital computers were invented, you would ask this question and you will get a precise answer from people who are inventing the computers. You need to get them to work, and then you need to play with them. Once you play with them, you figure out how to play with them better.
All right, well, we are just about out of time. One more question to the three of you, whoever wants to take it. How does quantum computing address environmental sustainability issues?
Well, I can come back to my point that the most power efficient way to do computing is at the quantum level. And so that's for one thing. We spend very significant portion of our energy today on sensing, on communicating, and on computing, which is communicating, storing, and sort of calculating. And as we go forward, we will spend much more. And so, practically speaking, if we want to actually have these robotic dogs equally powerful as my German Shepherd, with a modern technology, without actually functional intelligent materials, and without quantum technology, there will be no energy. And so it's impossible to move forward without moving to the next level of energy consumption. Next level of energy efficiency. Chris?
Any other last thoughts, Chris or Costa? Nope. All right. Or speak now, forever hold your peace. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Yes. Wow. We did not get to all of the questions. I mean, this is so great to have had so much interaction from the audience. Thank you so much, everyone, for sending those in. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us, for answering, Christopher, Konstantin, and Sergei. Such a pleasure, such an engaging discussion. Thank you. Now, everyone, while this first session is coming to a close, do stay tuned because the event is far from over. We have 3 more sessions happening over the next couple of hours that I promise you will not want to miss. So immediately following, we're going to kick off with 2 discussions that are taking place side by side. You can see it on the screen. One is the power of quantum, that speaks for itself, I think, and the other is science transformation, a new pathway for a sustainable society, with presentations by companies like IDQ, IP Quants, and SIT Alameda, among others. And as up to this point, we will have a final discussion. We will have questions, of course, at the end of the sessions, but then these will be followed by a final and just as exciting session called The Beauty of Science, where Serguei Beloussov will rejoin us, accompanied by Nicolas Gizan. So with that, I invite all of you to discover the other sessions, and we'll see you right back here for session 4 in just a little while.